All right, hello data lovers, and welcome to another I Love Data Fridays podcast. This podcast is from Volume 3 of our I Love Data Fridays series from February 10th, 2017, and this is question number 3, and our question being when, where, and how to use the OS total score. Well, who's talking data to you today? Well, of course, you've got me, Jeff Breimer-Bashore, Director of IT and Operations here at the International Data Evaluation Center. And today, I have with me Julie Wolf, our Help Desk Coordinator. Hey, Julie.
Hi, Jeff. Julie Wolf, Help Desk Coordinator here.
All right. And then also, we will also be having Dr. Adria Klein join us in a pre-recorded audio session about some of the questions that we have about the total score. Julie, you ready to talk a little data?
I am ready.
Okay. So question number 3 starts like this from a teacher leader. Says, I would like to know more about the total scores. We are not to use the total scores to pick students or the total scores being discussed at the trainer level. We have students that are not picked up that have lower total scores than those that are picked up for reading recovery using Stay-Nines, and would like to have a little better understanding of why. All right, question number 1. Question number 2, with that being said, when, where, and how could we use total scores? Ladies and gentlemen, I have to say that I'm totally throwing Julie into this video unprepared, so.
I'm just learning along with everyone else.
So, all right, so let's talk a little data. I've actually broken this video podcast out into a couple sections. First, we're going to talk about what is the OS total score, all right? And then we'll address the question that we have students that are not picked up that have a lower total scores than those that are picked up for reading recovery using Stay-Nines and would like to have a better understanding of why, all right? And then I'm going to have, we're going to play Dr. Adria Klein's comments about how we identify and select reading recovery students. Then we'll have a little section on when not to use the OS total scores, and then we'll finish it off with when, where, and how can I use the OS total score. So there we go. Are you ready now, Julie?
I'm ready.
All right. Stop asking you that question.
Good to ask.
All right. So what is the total score? It's a composite score. So it is a single score that is made up of all 6 tasks of the observation survey. So to figure out what the total score is, we take all 6 tasks of the observation survey and we add them together and we get a raw score. Mm-hmm. So using this raw score, then we look up a scale score, and that scale score ranges between 0 and 800. And it's this scale score that is the total score. Mm-hmm. And what it represents is an approximation of a child's literacy and comprehension mastery, because this total score was computed and using all 6 tasks of the observation survey together to help create this score. So the higher the score, in general, the more proficient the child. So Julie, I am going to turn the screen over to you. Let me stop sharing mine. Julie, all right, I can see your screen. Why don't we go ahead and go to our public website. And let's go to publications. And I'm going to have you find the U.S. norms for the tasks of the observation survey of early literacy achievement. There we go. We got it. All right. Now, let's open that file up, Julie. And I think we're going to scroll down to about page 14. That's the percent. Here we go. So, to figure out a child's total score, if you want to figure out a child's total score, this is the table right here. And you'll see in this table we have these columns that say raw score, scale score, raw score, scale score. The raw score is the score that you would get when you add the 6 tasks of the observation survey together. So Julie, let's pretend I added my 6 tasks together and I had this student had a score of let's say 39.
Okay.
So there we go. And then we would look one column to the right, and that child's total score would be a 308. So that is how we look up our total scores. You can do that on an individual child basis. Our computer systems automatically do that, so you guys don't have to look up scores when we're computing your reports. All right, Julie, I've got the screen back here now. As we were switching screens back, because Julie likes to cause all sorts of problems, she asked me a very, very good question about how, like, the scale score was made. And so I'm going to pull up a document here. And this is a document from the Journal of Reading Recovery, and it's actually the same document I showed in question number 1 this week about the validity and the reliability of the observation survey. But it talks about how the scale score was computed, that, you know, this isn't just something where some guy added up some numbers and voila, made up a special score that, you know, we can use. The score was made using, you know, validated and well-used statistical methods. And it was written by our former research director, Jerry D'Agostino. Let me just read one section here. It's at the last paragraph on the first page. Students' raw scores on all 6 observation survey tasks from fall, mid-year, and year-end were treated as 6 partial credit items in the item response theory analysis. For example, a student who's identified 30 letters out of 54 on the letter identification earned 30 possible points, 30 of the possible 54 points. The one parameter item response theory model fit the data well, indicating that the 6 tasks could be used together to develop one common, now let me switch pages, literacy scale. Please note that the total score resulting from the IRT procedures will be computed only for research purposes. It will not be an appropriate score or procedure for anyone using the observation survey involving children. We're going to talk more about that later. I always get the follow-up question, well, what total, you know, if I have a total score of 400, what kind of text reading level does that relate to? And it's kind of hard to give a one-to-one correlation of what it relates to. But in general, if you look at this figure 1 here in this report, what Jerry does is he has the scale of the total score listed along the side here. These little hash marks just represent the number of kids that got that specific total score. But what's really important is on this right-hand side here, he's equating, so for example, around a scale score of 245, these are generally kids who have a score of 1 on hearing and recording sounds and words, a writing vocabulary of 1. The first text reading level we get is up here at about a 340-ish, which means these kids probably have a 0 text reading level. So you can get a general idea using this figure right here. So let's get to our next question here. So the question was, we have students that are not picked up that have lower total scores than those that are picked for reading recovery, you know, using our normal stay nines, and we would like to have a better understanding of why. And so this is actually it's a difficult question for us to answer why. And it's because, you know, data doesn't always tell the whole story. I could look at a child's data and it tells me part of what's going on with the child, but we know that reading recovery places a huge emphasis on observation. So sometimes the data may record one thing, but the teacher may be seeing other things as she's observing the child that simply can't be recorded in the data. We can't quantify it. It's qualitative data. And what I wanted to show was a quick example here of this example of what the teacher leader is pointing out. This is just a sample data from a school we had last year. So I'm having the columns here. I'm showing children's fall total score, their text reading level, concepts about print, letter identification, writing vocabulary, how word test, and hearing recording sounds and words. And we're separating it out by kids who were served in the first round and kids who were served in the second round. Now, I've identified 2 kids already. Here's a second round kid with a lower score than a first-round kid. Now, there's more than one example in here, but I'm just choosing this one. And if we do a comparison of the scores, I mean, truly the child does have some lower scores there. And I can't tell you why. I can't tell you why the teacher didn't pick up this child first. As I talked to a few people about this, what I got, though, is that sometimes what you see or what we're seeing in the data are children who maybe showed up after, you know, the first couple weeks of school. Maybe they still got fall tested, but they showed up after the initial selection of reading recovery kids was done. We still have fall data about them, but they couldn't been picked up until the fall because slots are already filled. And I'm going to say this also is that, and we're going to have Dr. Adria Klein's going to speak, is that student selection is not solely based on just data. They're not just data points. There's a complex interaction going on with those students and their literacy acquisition. And so we have to, remember, rely on our observations and not just solely on the data. Now comes a special part of it. I'm going to have, it's a pre-recorded video I did with Dr. Adria Klein from the Reading Recovery Trainer with St. Mary's College of California. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about how we identify and select reading recovery students. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I have with me on the over Zoom here Dr. Adria Klein, Reading Recovery Trainer at St. Mary's College of California. And Adria, welcome to our I Love Data Fridays podcast.
Thanks, Jeff. Delighted to be here.
So, Adria, I thought we'd take a second here. We have you sort of introduce yourself and tell us about your experience with reading recovery and early literacy.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm glad to share. And focusing on the reading recovery experience, I wanted folks to know I trained as a teacher in 1991 before training as a trainer. And people joke about needing 2 years of training. I think I've had 6 years of training.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning.
Yeah.
So in my training year, I had 2 rounds of kids. I actually got into a 3rd round and learned a lot about student selection in that year. And I'm always continuing to learn about identifying and selecting students. My observations began to be honed in the training as a teacher. I learned a lot about the theory behind it as a trainer, and I've been learning more every year as I work with teacher leaders and train teachers and children interactions as well.
Okay, good. So yeah, so Adria, you of course we've talked about this earlier, but you've already hit on our topic of our main question here. You know, how do we identify and select our students for reading recovery?
I think it's one of those puzzling questions, especially if you're newly trained or newly in the training, and it doesn't get a lot easier over time. Every child is unique. Dr. Clay let us know that we observe closely. We think about all we've been noticing during the observation survey interactions, and that we make a decision based on those observations. She spends a lot of time in the observation survey book telling us in the last 2 chapters, 7 and 8 in particular, why this is about observation, how there are other things we can observe as well, and how the observation continues as we refine our understanding in the first 2 weeks of working with the child.
Yeah, so now I get some teachers at times that, you know, our teacher leaders that contact us that, you know, they say, you know, they try to pick their students solely kind of based on data, and we discourage that because we know that the process is a little more complicated in that. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit about, like, you know, as evaluating children, but then using data to back up your selections of students?
Well, I know data is quantifiable, but data is also qualitative. And when we observe a child, we're gathering data. So for example, they could have 100% on a running record that we did at level 2, but at the same time, they paused a lot, self-corrected a lot, And as we come up to the accuracy score, that doesn't always reflect what we saw or heard sitting side by side with the child. Same is true on all the other subtests that we look at. What are we noticing? Where are there pauses? My background is in particular with English learners, because I did my doctorate at New Mexico in reading and English as a second language. And one thing I brought to my reading recovery understanding is different patterns of phrasing and pausing.
Oh,
That's
okay.
something you observe for, but we don't have a true coding. We just have a way of noting language behaviors. That would never be a quantifiable score, but it's important qualitative information in making a decision.
Ah, yes. No, that's good. That's good. See, and I love that. I'm going to say this a little later in one of my slides, is that, the data doesn't always tell the whole story. It just can't. We're recording an aspect of a child's skill, but I had never even thought about how like a child pauses as they're trying to read everything. So yeah, okay.
I appreciate that. And thinking about the nature of what we observe, we can also observe if they're eager. We can observe their interest in the task. We can observe their willingness to participate. And of course, it's a new setting and situation, so we have to take that into account. But all of these qualitative observations are what Clay is emphasizing, even though we're giving quantifiable assessments that have stanines and scores. Those can't be our bottom line decision point.
Yeah. Okay. Preparing for this, we talked about even bringing in other assessments that can be used or other points to consider. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit more.
Well, I think if you observe, there are other things you might want to know. And Clay gave us room for this on the form for the summary front page that's in the observation survey text on page 124. And if we think about the things that we would notice at the bottom, she says, other task. And those are often glossed over. She suggests just as options, writing sample, story, which she leaves wide open, but she's mainly referring in her narrative to the possible use of a retelling. And there are rubrics for that we have in the field, but not from reading recovery, and even a spelling assessment. To get a little more information, if you're hearing and recording sounds and words, doesn't give you clear information about how they might write, and you need to then go to how do the tests interact with each other. If they had a fairly high hearing and recording sounds and words for an opening assessment, but a very low writing vocabulary, then the issue is, where is the processing not yet moving along in a smooth way, and why might you want a spelling assessment? There are two other assessments we really need to think about with the range of learners, and not just English learners, because we're all English learners, but this idea of kids who don't get a chance to talk much, interact much, and may not respond or talk up in class, and that's the record of oral language and Bix and Gutches, also by Clay and other colleagues. And there is even a video about record of oral language available from RRCNA and the National Association of Trainers. So as we think about those additional assessments, once you observe, then you have to ask yourself, what else do I want to know before I make a final decision on selection? And those are all observable behaviors that we took from quantitative assessment, but added our qualitative lens to it.
Yeah, and so I think, we said it the other day as we were kind of preparing that, in the end, it comes down to the teacher's, I can't remember our exact phrasing, but I want to say it was their trained professional opinion, and I can't, if that's not the right way we stated it, you might correct me, but it's their trained professional opinion that is the final decision-making point on selecting a child for reading recovery?
Well, early in reading recovery experience as a teacher, one of the things I realized, I may have had a PhD, I may have taught already for 20 years, but I suddenly felt like, because I was using a new tool, that I didn't know how to continue to rely on my teacher decision making.
Oh.
And I think as teachers, we need to have the confidence that, one, we will collaborate with other teachers and our teacher leader as we discuss our observations. Two, we're always open to new thinking and new opportunities for observing. No different than you commented on, what about the pauses during a running record?
Mm-hmm.
What might we know from those, or even how the child phrased? Those kinds of things are always new learning. And the reason reading recovery is so powerful and exciting for me is that I'm always learning anew with every new child I assess and every new child I teach.
All right. Well, Adria, I want to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule today to join us for this I Love Data Fridays podcast. I hope you had a good time.
It was new learning for me to even be at a point where I had to say this in one setting. So guess what? You gave me a new learning opportunity. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. All right. So I've got one final question, and I asked, well, I make it sound like I've had a whole bunch of people I've interviewed. You're really my second person I interview, but I've asked all my people so far on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest. How much do you love data?
Jeff, is an 11 an option here?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So
I'm a data geek.
Yeah.
I've always been a data geek. And I think what reading recovery taught me was that I needed many forms of data to be a good interactor with children and a powerful decision maker and keep all my learning open. That's what makes data an 11 for me.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, Adria. Thank you once again for sharing your insight and your expertise there. And so, ladies and gentlemen, though this isn't the end of the podcast, I always like to close off our little sections. We'll talk data to you later, but really we're just going to continue the podcast with more stuff afterwards.
Anger is great. A lot of passion.
What's that?
A lot of passion.
Yeah. Anything that you picked up from that kind of, like what she was saying, that particularly struck home with you? Or
that the teachers are using cues that aren't part of the OS or even C9s, whatever, using their own judgment, like the pauses in vocalization or whatever it was called.
Her pauses, the pauses in their phrasing. Yeah.
And so that could possibly be an explanation of why second round may have lower score than a few of the first round. Yeah,
that was a point that I was going to bring up. Yeah, is that, the total score may be lower, but the teacher may have observed something in that child that says, well, I've noticed this, they're doing that, and, we can save him till the spring. Yeah, great point, Julie. You totally sold my bullet point there. Awesome. So we get to this screen here where I'm saying, what is the total score not used for and why? And so it is to not, we're going to say it boldly here. We're going to say do not use it for student selection. And it's for the reasons that Julie and I have been saying and that Adria was saying in the video, is that it's not about a cut score when it comes to selecting a student. It is not one piece of datum that tells us a student needs reading recovery. It is a whole collection of information that you get from not only the quantitative data, the data that has numbers associated with, like text reading level, but the qualitative data, your observations of that student, and then the teacher experience plays into that. And the other way we're not going to use it is we don't use it to determine if a child is ready to discontinue. Now, I didn't ask Adria this question, but the discontinuation process is going to be similar. We're checking to see not only if the child has high enough scores, but are they demonstrating things like what they call their self-extending skills and other sort of qualitative things that you can't put a number to. All right, Julie, now we actually get to the fun part. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so now we get to talk about when, where, and how can I use the OS total score, my friend, the OS total score. And where it is wonderful to be used is in evaluation. At the end of the school year when you're evaluating your implementations, and specifically where I have found it to be useful, is what I call a data conversation starter. You know, you start the conversation with these data, the total score. And the reason why I say this is that the OS total score takes all of the OS scores into consideration, good representation of all of the 6 scores together. And so what it has as an advantage over looking at the individual totals or individual scores is that we can actually use it to see who is starting farther down in the hole, as I kind of like to say. You know, all of our reading recovery children started at a text reading level, you know, somewhere around a 0, 1, or 2. And so they all kind of look like they're starting from the same place. But with the total score, we can actually see that some children are starting farther down and have much longer to go than others. We can show this for schools and school districts as well. And then we can also see who is making the most growth. You know, once again, you know, we can try to use the text reading level to simulate who's making the most growth, but the text reading level doesn't take into account all of the other scores. The total score does. So we can see who's making the most overall growth. And I say it's a conversation starter because remember, the OS total score doesn't quite equate, one total score doesn't quite equate to a specific score on the observation survey. It's not quite one-to-one like that, but it starts the conversation, and at that point, when you see something that's catching your attention, you can begin to investigate further by looking at the individual observation survey scores. Now, Julie, I'm going to have you switch screens again. So Julie's had this screen already pre-set up for us here, and we are on the data entry website. And Julie has already clicked on the on-demand reports button on the reports page. And we are looking at a specific report that is called the OS Scores by School report. This is a brand new report that we published this year in the fall. And this is what this chart starts off with. It starts with by showing the OS total score. Notice in the title it says, do not use the total score to select students in the fall or as criteria to end a student's intervention. Just to reiterate that there. Now, what it's showing is that there's one bar for each school in your site. So on this site, there just happens to be a lot of schools. Now, we can't show the schools' names in this podcast, but the school names would show at the very bottom of the report off the screen there. All right, so one bar for each school. The bottom of each bar represents where a school, the average total score at the start of the school year for full program children. The top of each bar represents the average year-end total score for all full program children at the end of the school year. All right, so the height of the bar represents how much that school, the growth over the school year. The bottom dashed line represents the national average for full program children in the fall, OS total score, and the top dashed line represents the national year-end OS total score, average OS total score. And then the actual amount of gain is shown in the number below the bars. So on that bar that Julie's showing right there, that school made 199 points gain on the total score. The bars are ordered from left to right, from least amount of gain to most amount of gain. So from left to right, least amount of gain to most amount of gain. So I think this is a great conversation starter because I think some of you are already noticing, for example, the school that's got a 126 near the, they start a little above the average, but they don't quite make average by the end of the school year. Why? Now, the total score doesn't tell us that, but it certainly has started the conversation. kind of a other example, if we go to the school that's got a 194, that school, you know, they started below the average, and look what the teachers were able to accomplish. They were able to get kids that were, you know, above the average there at the end of the school year. So this is great. It starts the conversation. And Julie, what we'll do is then let's go to the report type drop-down box. Now we can look at other tasks of the observation survey. You know, we can investigate further. Let's do hearing and recording sounds and words. So she's going to select that, and then you're going to hit View Report. So there we go. We've got the same report shown for us again, but this time we're using hearing, recording sounds, and words. We can see the scores at the bottom. The bars are still in the same order. So they're in order by the OS total score from the guy on the total score who they made the least amount of growth on the left to the most amount of growth on the right. It's not ordered by growth here on hearing, recording sounds, and words. This way, schools always stay in the same place as you switch tasks on the observation survey. So we can see, you know, what's going on. So you can drill down and see the various things are happening. It was wonderful. I actually talked to a teacher leader today that, you know, we were looking at this report, and we can actually see the effects that a change in the kindergarten, the curriculum in kindergarten had on their total score and other things, you know, this year. You know, it had they made it in 2015 and 16, you know, the effect that it had on their programs. So this is a good place to start. It's a conversation starter. You can start with this report and really dig down into it and find out what's going on. All right, Julie, I'm going to grab the screen back from you. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Julie, thank you for your time and your help today.
Thank you. It was very informative, and I learned a lot myself.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that I just kind of like sprung it on you too. I was like, Julie, time to do a video. Woo!
Okay.
So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for watching another I Love Data Fridays podcast, and we'll talk data to you later.